Death comes for you. Feel its icy breath.
Man, I remember when Com was still with us. It was so much fun. I miss him.
Good times.
I miss Com.
But I've got to power through and get on with the second annual Memorial Com stream.
Welcome to another one of the Gamer's Advocate Sans Com. Today, we're going to be going over Baldur's Gate 2. We did a Baldur's Gate 1, me and Banana, and the reason why we do these without Com is Com has played Baldur's Gate 1 and he's in the middle of playing Baldur's Gate 2, but there's a lot he has admitted he doesn't remember about the first one. So we went ahead and did an episode without him for that one. So he couldn't be with us here today. So we're going to go ahead and cover Baldur's Gate 2. I think it's really relevant now that Baldur's Gate 3 has been so popular. And I know you thoroughly enjoy Baldur's Gate 3. I like Baldur's Gate 3. I had day one early access, and I can't tell you how much hate, and nobody remembers this, but when it was announced and then when it was coming out in early access, it was like, early access, $50 for an early access game on Baldur's Gate 3. It's going to be, it's not even done by BioWare, and it was just, oh my goodness. I couldn't tell you how many times I read about or saw things like, this is a travesty. Don't even bother. Why are they even doing this? And now nobody remembers that stuff. They just remember it. So the point is, you put out a good game, all is forgiven.
Yeah. I think I definitely relate to a lot of those people who are expecting to be disappointed. Because that's how I feel with pretty much everything anymore. Is I feel like there are a lot of people who are trying to make something new, but they only feel comfortable doing that from a familiar starting point. So branching off an existing franchise or remaking something that has already been done. And I'm getting a little tired of that, but to see somebody come into an existing franchise and do what I think is like all the right things with the game. I mean, there are obviously little issues here and there that I'm not going to dwell on, but I think Larian really tried to capture what the feeling of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 was, and not handcuffed themselves to exactly what Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 were, and that makes for a better game. Is you're trying to connect with what actually made the first two games great, instead of guessing and trying to copy everything to cover your bases.
Yeah, if you piggyback too much, you get nothing but comparisons. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to make a game that's wholly unique and modern, then why make it to be exactly like it was before? I mean,
why associate it with something else anyway?
Yeah.
If it's going to be completely new.
And I did say that after having played day one access for Baldur's Gate 3, and even up to right before it was officially released, we only had access to chapter 1, and I kept thinking, I think I know where the story's going. And I clearly didn't have all the pieces to the puzzle, but I was like, why didn't they just call this whatever and say a Baldur's Gate story? And I think everybody would have been happy with that. But now that I know the full story, I totally get it. I'm not critical of the story at all.
Well, but, I mean, it's the same thing that Baldur's Gate 2 did, where Baldur's Gate 2 is definitely a Baldur's Gate game that has nothing to do with Baldur's Gate. So Baldur's Gate 3, in that early access where you're only playing through Act 1, didn't really have much to do with Baldur's Gate. It was mentioned a few times. People were traveling there. The main character might be from there. But you don't get there in gameplay. So it didn't really need to be a Baldur's Gate game. But once we got the full released story and managed to play through everything, played through it on a few different characters, it's definitely a Baldur's Gate game. And it actually has to do with the city of Baldur's Gate.
And one thing I did notice about Baldur's Gate 3, what it did early on, is that it constantly made references to Baldur's Gate City, which is, I always thought a bit weird because Baldur's Gate 1 did not do that. It was just a destination for us. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, I got to get to Baldur's Gate. Well, we didn't know we had to get there. It was just in the area. And so at least they kind of tried to make a unique point of view of how familiar and to the characters that region was.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly it, that they did it correctly in that they gave the characters reasons to want to return to Baldur's Gate. For a lot of characters, Baldur's Gate feels like home. They have, their community there, their resources that they feel comfortable with, and they felt better about dealing with their current situation from Baldur's Gate than they did out in the wilderness or whatever. Whereas in Baldur's Gate 1, you don't care about Baldur's Gate. You have no connection to the city. You live nearby. That's it. So it made sense in both contexts for the character to think about Baldur's Gate the way they did. It's just in Baldur's Gate 3, it was kind of set up in a way that you could hype it up a little bit more because the character had a reason. You knew you were going to go there eventually. Yeah.
And if you have played Baldur's Gate 1, you'll know what I'm saying. But you do start off in, a fort-sized city. It's the Library of Candlekeep. So you're not really a big area. And then you go into like this small pocket, little woods here, the coastline, maybe a small dungeon or something like that. And you go to like Baragos, which is a fairly large city, but even then, not that big. And then when you go to the reveal of Baldur's Gate City, it's huge compared to everything. And that's what I kind of remember. It was like, it was impactful on the person playing the game. Not so much to the characters. Characters didn't really care. But then again, you had so many companions you could get that almost kind of makes sense. They could have been from anywhere. Like many of them, like Edwin. Whereas the characters in Baldur's Gate 3, they are from there. So again, like you said, it ties back to they have a rationale, a reason to want to go back there. And that's why they keep mentioning it, which was kind of interesting because I don't remember my history 100% here, but the original Baldur's Gate by BioWare, I don't even think that they were going to call it Baldur's Gate. They were going to call it something else. And it just kind of just organically became Baldur's Gate,
Yeah, I mean, when you think about that title, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Because, I mean, if you're somebody who's not familiar with the series and you just see Baldur's Gate, you're not going to have any idea what's going on in that game. And the term Baldur's Gate doesn't really tell you anything. And then you start playing the game, and for 16 hours, you still don't know what Baldur's Gate is. It's not until you get through Nashkill, you get through Peldvale and all of the Cloakwood, that you finally reach Baldur's Gate, and they're like, oh yeah, you can finally come in now. And then you see the city, and you're like, oh, this is, okay, it's kind of a big deal. I get it.
Yeah. And unlike, similar series, Icewind Dale, even Neverwinter Nights, which, there was an original Neverwinter Nights, but BioWare's version of Neverwinter Nights, it was specifically that area, and you spent a lot of time in that immediate area. So it was like there was a direct connection to the title. Baldur's Gate doesn't really do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. It was interesting because of how much of that game occurs outside of Baldur's Gate. And then Baldur's Gate 2, all of it occurs outside Baldur's Gate. And then Baldur's Gate 3, the majority of the game occurs outside Baldur's Gate. It's just that those momentous occasions, those things that really drive the story and that become the history of this world, those happen in Baldur's Gate.
Like I said, I don't remember my history at all because I think that there was some pushback on that too. And then because they had already kind of knew from a story standpoint that they were going to move beyond game one. There was development for that. And when BioWare was originally, trying to create the game, they were told by Interplay to make it a little bit more family friendly because D&D, even back then, was considered not good for children, not good for the public. You know, it was the devil's handiwork.
Yeah, I remember a lot of that.
And that's why you have a lot of characters that aren't truly evil. It's really hard to create a true evil party and be successful in Baldur's Gate 1. In Baldur's Gate 2, once they had shown that the IP could be successful, they had a lot more liberty. And so they were able to kind of do it. And I think BioWare already kind of had a notion that this was going to be the end of the series for as far as their contribution to the series. So they just went and took those liberties and said, it is what it is. And that's why Baldur's Gate 2 is probably, I hate to say more important, but there's so many things that are done right in Baldur's Gate 2 that Baldur's Gate 1 was just barely touched on. And again, we went over like the fact that you're not even in Baldur's Gate at all in Baldur's Gate 2. You start off in Athkatla. You really have no idea where you are. Now, I'm not covering, well, I should say we. If you want to cover it, you can. But there's a game that came out with the Enhanced Edition that kind of bridged between Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. I've never really covered it. I don't really guess it's canon. Just don't know how canon it really is.
Yeah.
Its goal was to kind of, like I said, bridge how you got from 1 to 2, but I almost don't really even need it at all. You know, there's so much that you find out in Baldur's Gate 2 early on, just the very beginning, that are just so impactful if you kind of played the character, kind of like how Comets played it with the kind of the canon characters, that things happen to them and you're like, what? Oh, wow. So from the very beginning, you know that you're dealing with a very different story and because if you take a beloved character, somebody that you may actually truly like in your party, and now suddenly BioWare said, we're going to knock them off.
Yeah.
And it's
not in this game.
Yeah. And they're giving you a story content reason for it. They thought about it. They thought about all those things. So
I do appreciate that there is that game that bridges the gap, especially because of, the difficulty of Baldur's Gate 1. Like you really end up proving yourself when you win. When you reach that final save, you've demonstrated that you're capable of handling something pretty impressive there. And the idea that you somehow wake up in prison in Baldur's Gate 2 feels inconsistent with the force of nature you became in Baldur's Gate 1. So I do appreciate that there is some kind of story reason as to how you got there, but in the world of D&D, there's always something more powerful, so it wasn't a huge leap without that intermediate game. I just kind of like that and I think the intermediate story was fun. It didn't detract anything from Baldur's Gate 1. It set up Baldur's Gate 2. It wasn't exceptional in my opinion, but it was in a position where it was way easier to screw things up than it was to enhance them, and I think it enhanced them a little bit, and that's I think praiseworthy at least.
Yeah, the main antagonist in the game in between.
We're talking Siege of Dragonspear,
Siege
right?
of Dragonspear. There we go. Yeah.
Okay.
I
was worried that I had it wrong.
I'm so dismissive that I can't even remember the name of it. But Siege of Dragonspear. I think that the main antagonist was interesting until they were no longer interesting, because then you think, okay, well they're coming from an interesting point of view. This is one that we haven't seen before, and they have a commanding presence. Then it's written actually fairly well for that character. But then you find out it's just really a big bad. It's really all they are. And so I'm like,
I think
the ball.
They kind of played on a cliche there, and it didn't deliver.
And in my head, and this is the problem, I write stories in my head, and then when it falls short, when the actual game falls short, I was like, well, I could have done better. Unfortunately, that's just my own opinion now. I'm going to tell you how I thought it should have been done, but and then, I may get, if you want to put in the comments saying, no, I like Siege of Dragonspear much better, your idea sucks. That's fine. But I always thought
I'll start drafting my comment now.
yeah. Well, I always thought like with the Shadow Thieves being a prominent role in Baldur's Gate 2, you'll find that out. And they do exist. The Thieves Guild is clearly in Baldur's Gate 1 if you play it. Mm-hmm. And if they were clearly, you actually get introduced to them very early in Baldur's Gate 2. I kind of thought, here is the person we're dealing with, the main antagonist, being interrupted by the Shadow Thieves. Well, what if he had hired them to obtain you in Siege of Dragonspear, sorry. And they, do what they're supposed to do, but then he double crosses them. And now that's why they're attacking the base. Because we're never really told why they're attacking the base necessarily. They're just attacking the base.
Aren't we told exactly what you just said?
I
could have sworn that if you talked to all the Shadow Thieves members while playing through Baldur's Gate 2, they reveal that
they were part. Yeah.
Basically hired them and then didn't deliver when they provided you to him.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying, is that's part of in the story, but that's what I thought Siege of Dragonspear was going to cover. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
they definitely don't address that in Siege of Dragonspear.
Right. It's a totally different.
It's
the reason that's why I said the reason to bridge Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 was that extra. I call it a DLC because you can get it with the enhanced edition, but they don't cover what Baldur's Gate 2 actually said how you got there. So I was like, why? I didn't need this part of the story.
I mean, it does. It feels like the end of Siege of Dragonspear, you get like 30 seconds that sets up Baldur's Gate 2, and it feels like if you're making a game to bridge the gap between Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2, that should be your focus, that setup. And it is very much just thrown in at the end. And Siege of Dragonspear's story doesn't actually address or lead into Baldur's Gate 2. It just kind of is another story that has a direct lead in at the end. It's not set up for Baldur's Gate 2. It's just they set up Baldur's Gate 2 in about 30 seconds at the end of the campaign.
Yeah. And that's where I was going with that. I probably did that whole delivery wrong, but that's kind of what I meant.
I'm much more comfortable blaming me on not understanding it than blaming you.
No. But that's where I kind of thought that the Siege of Dragonspear was going to happen. So I thought, okay, well, here's a character. I know they're not part of the Thieves Guild. So something interesting is going on. No. No. And then, like I said, they kind of dropped the ball on developing that character, the main antagonist. So again, I'm just not a big fan. I don't really cover it too much. In fact, none of my personal videos ever cover it at all. I get asked a lot, like, well, what about nope, I'm not going to cover it. Yeah.
One of the things that I do really enjoy about Siege of Dragonspear is the new companions and their new gear. So a lot of what I remember from Siege of Dragonspear is you pick up items that are usable only by one person or better when used by a very specific person. And I both liked and disliked that because it does make more sense for you to find stuff that is specifically suited to a person. But also, I don't want you to force me to take specific companions. Like, I want to choose the party I like and then find equivalent gear for everybody. So, like, if there's a specific axe that, is appropriate for McKean, who's in Siege of Dragonspear, I want there to be an equivalent weapon for each companion so that I can choose my party however I want and then find the best gear for them and not feel like I'm missing out.
But today, specifically, we're we're going to go over Baldur's Gate 2, and we've kind of touched the edges of it. But yeah, the only part of Baldur's Gate 2 that I do not like I dread every time I do it, is the very beginning. Nobody likes that beginning area. It's interesting the first time you do it, maybe the second, but man, now they have mods that, skip the whole dungeon where you start off, and I don't know, I don't like playing like that, but I get why those mods are made, because nobody likes it. I mean, it's just too long. If it was half of its size,
it's too long for what you accomplish with that time, because it's a lot of just backtracking over the same areas and like looping back to get an item and then going back and delivering that to an NPC or something like that. And it's just for the payout of getting out of that dungeon with the equipment you do, it's not worth it. It takes way too long.
It's almost like an enhanced tutorial.
Yeah.
Because if you forgot how to play, well, we're going to help you remember. Because all the things are the same. I did remember when I first played it, I was like, oh, I have access to this. I don't remember having this spell before. And that's what I discovered the first. But again, after the first time or second time, you're like, the characters that you have, that you start off with, are going to be set. You don't have a option to bring in characters that you may have had from Baldur's Gate 1. So if you're used to running with, say, an evil party, you're not going to get that party. You're going to be forced to, if there were characters that maybe died in Baldur's Gate 1, well, suddenly they're there.
Yeah. Although I will say that's probably more of a limitation of the time period, because, I mean, we've seen the way BioWare does other games. You import previous game states. It makes sense that that's what they wanted for Baldur's Gate 2. Might not have been attainable in the time period that they had. But it does seem like they wanted to build off of the previous campaign story in a way that like felt like you were importing your previous game, and they just went with their best guess as to the party you would have had, or the party that made the most sense.
Yeah, they try to create a balanced party, because you do start off with Jaheira and Imoen and Minsc, and you get a thief, a new party member. But so if you think about the bigger context, you have like your healer, caster, you have Imoen, who's a half thief, half mage, you have your ranger, who, again, that's the part I didn't understand, because I get Minsc because he was beloved, but he's very limited in how you can use him. A ranger in old D&D rules was miserable. There's no point.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and Minsc as a ranger always felt more like he was just a pure fighter.
Yeah.
You just kind of throw him in the front lines and don't use any ranger abilities, and that's almost how to play Minsc.
Yeah, he's got massive strength and constitution. Why do I need to make him a ranger?
Yeah.
No, but if he had high dex on top of it, they're like, oh wow, okay, well,
yeah.
But you always had,
and yeah, that was the other thing. He felt like he was not built to be a ranger.
Yeah, he was ranger by default. So they were. I forget the name of the land where he comes from, but they said, "You are a ranger." And he says, "Okay."
Rashomon?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because the whole story with him, of course, is that he's supposed to be protecting his witch, which we find out what happens to her. So
nailed it.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished. Good work.
You know, a lot of people just can't not stand Imoen, and I get it. I 100% get it. You don't have to convince me. I get it. But I really do think that she's an interesting character, and I would have liked to have seen some reference to her in Baldur's Gate 3. Because, hell, they made references to other characters that I could have cared less about, but...
I think, yeah. Imoen's an interesting one, because in Baldur's Gate 1, it almost feels like you're forced to take her with you, just because at the very beginning of the game, she forces her way into your party. You can always remove her, but she joins you immediately. And then in Baldur's Gate 2, she joins your party immediately and then gets captured, and you have that goal of rescuing her. Like, she feels very directly tied to the main story. But you don't have her in your party for most of the game. So to go get her close to the end of the game, it feels like, well, how was I supposed to prepare for this? And why the hell does the rest of my party care? Like, this is somebody who was only important to the main character, or maybe important to Jaheira and Minsc from previous games, but nobody else really cares about her. And you meet brand new people, so they have no history with her. So it was one of those, like, those weird... It felt like they were deviating from that thing we love about Baldur's Gate 1, which is everybody has their own story, and you're just kind of catching them at that overlap where their goals align with yours. And in Baldur's Gate 2, it's they have their own story, and you are railroading them to go help you with your story.
And I guess that's what I could argue is so endearing about Minsc, because everybody that you meet that's a new character, or even maybe an older character that you can find, you know, you have to do stuff for them. It's kind of like, what can you do for me? Jaheira is probably well developed, you know, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily true for Viconia, but it's somewhat true. You have to rescue her.
Yeah.
But it's pretty easy.
Yeah. You always have to rescue Viconia.
but Minsc, you don't have to do anything. He's there for you. So he's kind of like the Garrus.
Knew that comparison was coming.
He's kind of like the Garrus of Baldur's Gate. So
yeah, and that definitely that works with the story that they've given Minsc in Baldur's Gate 2. Minsc has his goal, which was to protect Jaheira. It didn't go so well. And now Minsc he has no purpose. He probably feels lost in that moment because he failed his one assignment, really through no fault of his own. He just was overwhelmed, and now he is looking for something new to direct himself towards. And you've proven to be a worthwhile ally in the first game, assuming Minsc was part of that. And the way that Baldur's Gate 2 is set up, that becomes kind of the canon, is that even if you didn't have Minsc in your party in Baldur's Gate 1, you were kind and decent to Minsc. That's the Minsc you get in Baldur's Gate 2. And so he just kind of latches onto you, and you almost accidentally give him a purpose. I thought that was a really well done story. I as much as it does kind of feel like an easy win to just get a companion that's always going to be, you know, your ride or die, but it makes sense. It worked with the story the way they had set it up, and you get, you know, a beloved character who is always going to be on your side.
Yeah, and that's the magic of storytelling, because if you make it won't make almost too much sense, you don't see the story any other way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like I said, you know, Minsc doesn't ask any questions. He's there for you. He doesn't need anything else. I mean, you can be too evil for him,
Mm-hmm.
but other than that, no, he's there. So having him there in the opening dungeon kind of does make sense in that regard. But again, it's one of those, the opening party that you have, somewhat questionable. But like I said, coming back to Imowen, I think there was some genius story writing there, because it's like, why Imowen? Why are we so focused on her? What's so special about her? And through the story itself, we start realizing why things are impactful the way they are. There is a bigger picture here. We knew some of this is funny. You don't see this very much in other stories or other games. They give you all the information, but you just don't have enough ancillary parts to see why this is so much more important than what it is. Like, mm-hmm. You just know this is important. This is you because it's you. So it is important because you're centrally related to the topic at hand. But mm-hmm. because of all these other little things, you realize how much of a bigger focus the world has on you. And Imowen is that connecting tissue. And that's why I said I think she's a really great character. And at the very beginning, when when you realize the big bad is there too. Basically, if I can't have what I need, what I want to do, I'm going to take her with me because she's casting spells, and the mage group of the Athkatla, because you start off in Athkatla, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to take you all to a spellcaster dungeon. And so he gets his way because he's able to at least manipulate the situation where he knows where she's going to be at. But what's so important about her? And that's why I said that's the genius of the story writing of Baldur's Gate 2. There's so many like little things that like once you put them all together, it's like, wow.
Yeah. I think in that moment, the first time you play through, it just feels like he's being petty. And he's like, all right, I don't have time for this, but if you're going to enforce this rule against me, you should enforce it against everybody. And it's just another reason to hate that villain. And then as you play through the game, and if you invest all this time to, discover all of the backstory there, you really see why he made that decision and why it was that kind of impressive manipulation for him to downplay what he actually wanted in that moment so that he could get what he actually wanted. And yeah, like you were saying, it's just really well done to have that connecting thread be presented to you at the very beginning in a way that you can't even catch what's being shown to you until you get the rest of the context.
Yeah, and I mentioned Athkatla. I love the city of Athkatla so much more than Baldur's Gate. And so it's like one thing to say, like, why didn't we just start in Baldur's Gate? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, just start there, right? The culture is so different. And so you needed a story where you had a mage group that was controlling that city to even start that scene. Because they're the ones who interrupt casters. It's like, otherwise, who cares? It's a situation between these two guys, But it's magic's regulated in Athkatla. So buy a license. You have to buy a license. They don't care what you do with it, but you got to buy a license.
Yeah. And I feel like as a kid, that didn't make sense to me. And then I grew up and yeah, that checks out. That's exactly how this works, isn't it?
Yeah. That's so funny because again, yes, it depends on point of view, but man, that does make so much sense. Like you couldn't just make that up. That is something based on real life, right?
Yep.
Well, yeah. This is a world of magic. Think about it. A world of magic where magic is everywhere and you can cast it. You can do whatever. You have the council of the city is headed by mages, but you got to pay for your license.
Yep. Yeah. And it's just like you were saying, they don't care what you do with your license. And, we had that, what's his name? I want to say it was like Razamith or something in Baldur's Gate 1. He has his tower and he's doing shady stuff in there and nobody's really bothering him. This is just that taken to its extreme to say that like, oh yeah, you can absolutely do that. You can take prisoners. You can hold Erdelis as your captive if you pay for this license and get us off your back.
Yeah, you can just capture a nymph and just keep her up there in your tower. And
exactly.
It's the classic wizard's tower. And yeah, but yeah, the Athkatla also, you actually get to see how people respond to the bigger D&D world traditionally. Like when you first meet Viconia, you have to save her because they see a drow. They want to kill a drow. And you have to decide whether you need to rescue her from that situation or not. So I really appreciated that. Right. I was not expecting to run into Viconia there and then at that point. But I was glad I did. I was like, where's Viconia? Where's Viconia? But she
also feels like she is a later character in Baldur's Gate 1. You can get her in Act 1. You can get her almost immediately if you just go straight for it. But you don't really have a reason to go to Peldvale that early in the game, so you probably don't recruit her super early. She feels like a later game character. But in Baldur's Gate 2, she is right there. you basically have this confrontation with the Mages Guild, and they tell you where that guild is based out of. And if you go there, you meet Viconia. So it's almost instantaneous. She feels a lot more a part of Baldur's Gate 2 than she does in Baldur's Gate 1 because of that.
Yeah, Jaheira, Viconia, to a lesser extent, Imoen, and a couple of new characters have really fleshed out backstories. That's something that they couldn't really do in Baldur's Gate 1. Some of them had one. Some of them had missions you could do, quests you could do. In Baldur's Gate 2, you run across this companion that you may keep for a while because she's a better version of the Baldur's Gate 1 Imoen. So if you liked Imoen, she's there, and she's always trying to help the needy, and she comes from a wealthy family.
Equally annoying.
Yeah. But like I said, if you like that type of character, it's like, well, there you go. Here's a better version of that character. And it's basically Drew Barrymore in Baldur's Gate.
Yep.
They took pretty much her likeness and put that on there as the portrait. But I actually kind of liked her character, her overall arc, because it's a fairly short arc. You don't have to deal much with her. It's more classic to the Baldur's Gate 1, in which you just basically do the quest for them. They're there, they have some interesting things that they say, but it's a one and done type thing. So I kind of like that when I first did it, but then multiple playthroughs since then, you realize that there's other characters that actually have a little bit more interesting information about them that they bring to the table. So
I do think her story was well done. It was interesting. And like you were saying, it's relatively brief. You can just go off to the whole deal with her little quest line. There's a little bit of an after story arc where somebody's trying to force her to get married after all of that, and you can intervene. My only issue with that character is that she is just another Imoen, and Imoen's in the game. Like, we don't need two of them, especially if you're going to have that story where you're there for like a very tender moment for this other companion, and then they kind of latch onto you as like emotional support in that moment, and then you progress into the later game and you meet Imoen and you're like, well, I don't need two mage thieves that are no longer progressing as thieves. One of you has to go. It feels like it sets up this cruel decision you have to make.
Yeah, but without her, we don't have access to the most powerful weapon in the game.
I knew that's where you were going. You don't care about her. You care about the weapon that you gain access to through her.
I care about her booty. I mean, her loot. I mean, her goodies. Yeah, I don't know.
That also checks out.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because if you go there immediately, you do face some really difficult enemies if you're starting that early. So even
late game going to that, some of those enemies are tough. They have natural immunities to specific damage types, which means you have to strategize. You have to think out the combat. And it's annoying.
The first few times I did where I was able to get some of that really good loot, they don't attack you if you don't do anything. They only attack you if you take their stuff.
Yep.
So the first few times I was like, well, what if I just nab it real quick? Like, just because it's a real time with pause. I'm going to go over there, unlock it, undo the trap or whatever. And then, in the second round, do this. And then I'm going to put on my boots of speed, and I'm going to go over here. I'm going to, whatever. Well, then some of them they actually fit through the smaller doors, and suddenly I have a party of like four of them just wailing on my party, and I'm like, oh, Lord.
Yep. And it's funny because those are thrown in, and you're already dealing with challenging enemies. Like the trolls in that area are annoying. They're real pain, and there's that added issue with the real time with pause where the game has to calculate when their health points have dropped below a threshold, and that calculation seems to be very low priority. So they might get like 3 or 4 attacks after you have essentially knocked them out, and they're waiting in that vulnerable state for you to deliver the killing blow. That was what I remember most about that mission, is how many times I had a troll with no health just swinging at me. And I'm like, lay down. Lay down so I can kill you.
Yeah, because to finish off a troll in D&D, you have to finish it with acid or fire. And, you know, in Baldur's Gate 3, similar to like the goblins and stuff, you face a group of enemies. Suddenly they all know that you're there, so they all come at you. So that makes sense. Well, these trolls are trolls. They're just kind of like walking around doing their own little thing. What do they have? They don't care about like the library books and stuff. They're just hanging out. So I totally get the immersion side of it, where like not all of them are going to come at you, but that kind of creates a problem because you can't just cast fireball when you get them all together. Like you could group enemies in Baldur's Gate 3 and tactically do that, but this one you have to be a little bit more resource minded, because like I only have 4 fire arrows.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to start using spells here at some point.
Yeah, and that was definitely another part of the challenge. There is, there's not just kind of like an infinite resource of fire and acid damage. There are, you know, some weapons that permanently do those, but they're very uncommon. They're rare. You have to go out of your way to find them, and then you really only need that final blow to be acid or fire. So there are better weapons for doing that initial damage, and then you have to switch at the end. So it was a very strategic campaign to go through her quest line and liberate that hold and deal with everything there. And then the added challenge of getting all the secrets.
And I think you can also, because I don't remember if you don't have to marry her, but you can claim lordship over her thing, and then you get money.
The hold becomes the fighter's stronghold.
Right, and then you can get money every week, something like that, like 500 gold or something. I don't know, something like crazy. So it's like, oh, okay.
I did think that was another neat little addition they put in, the idea of those strongholds, where, you know, if you're a thief, you could take over a branch of the Thieves Guild. If you're a mage, you can take over Lavok or something like that. And if you're a fighter, you can take over the Arnis Hold. I thought that was a nice little addition. It does seem like some of them are better than others, though. I didn't like managing the Thieves Guild. I didn't like that I had to make choices. But in Darnus Hold, I could just be like, this is mine now, pay me. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah. In the background, of course, there's like, you know, serfs, peasants toiling away, having to pay their taxes to you.
Yeah, we didn't get into the morality of what it is to be, you know, a feudal lord.
Yeah, we didn't cover all that. We saved them from the trolls. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, we're heroes.
Yeah. You do run across some very interesting companions. Far more interesting than the Baldur's Gate 1 companions, for sure. But I just, you know, if the Baldur's Gate 1 were into for some reason, and it's kind of a good thing that they're not there, because, you know, sometimes like with Mass Effect, you know, Mass Effect 1 to 2, you have new companions, but it's almost like, why? You know, at some point it's like, really, why? I get it organically, that happens, but not all the time, right? But it makes sense in Baldur's Gate 1 to 2 because it's a totally different region.
Yeah. It did, when you think about it, it seems a little weird that there are as many carryovers as there are in Baldur's Gate 2 because you're in a different region. It makes sense for Jaheira and Minsc and Imoen because you're all kind of brought somewhere. But like then as you run into other people out in the world, it's like, how did you get here? And like, what are the odds that you ended up in the same location as the main character? So it makes sense to introduce a lot more new characters.
Yeah. I just feel like Viconia was tied to me. She is pulled to me somehow.
Well, yeah. Nobody's going to argue against Viconia showing up in another game, even if it doesn't make sense how she got there.
Well,
But like,
she actually gives a long explanation how she got there. But yeah, I mean, even then, it's like, okay.
Yeah. We had to write a long explanation because we just really wanted her to be in this game. But I mean, when you run into, you can run into Garrick outside the Order of the Radiant Heart, and I like that Easter egg is in there. You can't recruit him again, which is fine because he sucked anyway. But I do like that there was that callback to Baldur's Gate 1. I just don't know how how it makes sense, like how Garrick ended up there.
You know, you can kind of see the evolution of story writing in BioWare in some characters too. Blackwall in Inquisition is not really well loved at all. A lot of times people just like, oh, he betrayed me and, you know, I can't stand him. I cast him out, or I did this or that. A lot of people just don't like him. But I don't think, and I'm not going to say you should like him, but he does have a compelling reason to do what he did. You know, he actually tries to make amends. He's actually not even asking for forgiveness. He never once asked for forgiveness. He said, this is what I did. And I tried to right the wrongs of my past by taking up the shield of a person who fell, you know, not doing what I want to do with it to get me out of like a get out of jail card. I wanted to do what his life's mission was. But when you have a character like Keldorn in Baldur's Gate 2, it's almost that character in Inquisition's Blackwall in a way, because it's kind of like a natural transition. It's almost like Keldorn is the Grey Warden who fell, and Blackwall is the one who took his shield, because the story is very, very, very similar. So if you don't like Blackwall, that's perfectly fine. But if you do like Blackwall, or if you want a little bit more information about Blackwall and kind of like the ideology of where BioWare comes from as far as like taking up someone's shield and moving on, look into Keldorn, play Baldur's Gate 2, do Keldorn's story, and it is really, really interesting. It's a very human, actually. He's a paladin, but he has a very human story.
I'm not a fan of Keldorn. I don't dislike him. I don't hate him nearly as much as I hate Animan, but I don't like him. And then when you meet Animan and it feels like Keldorn in training, you're like, oh god, this guy. I don't like what you're trying to become. I hate what you are right now.
Yeah,
so
you're not a fan of
Keldorn was an
Paladin.
interesting one.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I always wanted to have a paladin in my party in Baldur's Gate. It's annoying in Baldur's Gate 1 because you can't have any evil characters if you're recruiting Ajantis. He will throw a hissy fit and try to kill them. I don't think Keldorn is that bad, but he's also not that great. And it is very much more interesting that way, given that he's, a human being. He's just trying to do his best. He's not this force of good. He's just a person who's trying to be good. It makes for a much more interesting story, but I just didn't like him.
Keldorn is that he doesn't put honor in front of him. He puts his oath in front of what he does. Now that comes with a lot of baggage. And so he is married, and his wife for several years knows his position and his role. But at some point, she doesn't want that anymore. Mm-hmm. Does she discuss this with him? Who knows? Probably not. Not based on how we communicate with Keldorn about his history and his past. But that's his history, and so he has to deal with that. So now he has to question his whole, is this even worth it? There's a lot going on there, and if you play that as like a kid, I can imagine, man, I just need you in my party.
Yeah.
But
I think it was definitely one of those things, like, as a kid, I didn't like it because you see Keldorn, he's a paladin. He's supposed to be that knight in shining armor. He's supposed to always do the right thing. And you see him struggle with these decisions because he's considering what society says is the right thing versus what he believes is the right thing. And as a kid, you're much more free to just be like, no, do the thing you think is right. But like as an adult, you feel that societal pressure a lot more. And for me, playing as a kid, I was just like, "You're stupid. Just do the right thing." And then as an adult, I'm like, "Oh, I get it." And I also don't want to experience that while playing a video game. I have to deal with that in real life.
And that's why I think a lot of people don't like Blackwall, because it forces that type of emotion out of people. Like, I just want to just not like him. But why don't you like him?
Yeah.
Let's kind of get into this. And if you'd rather just not use him and use somebody else, great. But that's the problem with Dragon Age compared to Baldur's Gate, because Baldur's Gate, you have 6 people in your party. In Inquisition, you don't have that many, so you can like mix and match however you want to, because you have more companions than you have slots for sure. But in Baldur's Gate 2, Baldur's Gate 1, you have to fill. Well, you don't have to fill them, but if you want a full party, then you're going to have to decide, who's important to come along and who's not. But again, they all have their own backstories that kind of lend itself to a bigger picture story, not just the main story. And so they're side quests more or less, but hidden within your party. So
I think that's something I'd like to see in a more modern game, because we've talked about that idea of party size being kind of like a technological limitation of the game. So it's not. You can see it kind of explained in other games. Even though Cobb's not here, I'm going to force it in. In Final Fantasy VII, there's the moment where you have to choose your party, and he's like, "Well, we can't all go wandering around in the wilderness," and you're just sitting there thinking, "Why? Why can't we all?" I mean, that's essentially what we're doing anyway. It's just now when I get into combat, 2 of you are sitting on the sidelines watching. And I would love to see a game that leans into the idea that your party can be whatever size you want it to be. It just becomes more difficult for you to manage personalities, and you have to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page, make sure that everybody is reminded of what they're working towards, and they're focusing on the reasons that they should cooperate as opposed to the reasons they should go off and do their own thing. And I feel like that would make for a much more realistic and a much more engaging experience if you're saying, well, I can make, future fights a lot easier if I can recruit a team of 12. I will have to balance that with my ability to kind of organize a group of 12 and make sure that they all feel like they belong here. I feel like we've progressed in terms of technology enough to the point where you could do that in a game, but it definitely throws some balance issues. If you try to play, Baldur's Gate 3 with mods that open up additional party members, it changes every battle because now you have extra turns, you have extra abilities. It really mixes up the gameplay itself, and I feel like you'd have to build the game for that mechanic from the start in order to make it make sense.
I've always found a party of 5 in my head to make more sense. Like a party of 5.
Just because you like the TV show?
I don't know the TV show.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay.
I just know it existed.
But a party of 5, because at least it gives you either the option of a tank and, maybe a melee DPS. I could give you all combinations here, or because you have 5, you don't even almost need a main tank. You could be 2 off tanks. You could be 2 melee DPSs. In a party of 4, like you have in Dragon Age, the problem is not everybody can heal. So you have to bring a healer. So you almost have to specialize in healing. So you almost need like a caster who is a DPS caster, or because the other one could be a DPS as well, or that one could be your off tank, and then you have to have a tank. It's almost like the MMO build. Like, I just don't like that. Just give me 5, so that way it gives me just that little bit of extra versatility. But again, that's why I like Baldur's Gate, because the party of 6 gives me just that extra range. Maybe I don't need that 6th one, but I like 5 for whatever reason. Like in Mass Effect, you only get 3, but it kind of works because it's more squad based. But
yeah, I think it really comes down to like the differences between each companion in the game. So in Baldur's Gate, there's a lot of differences between those classes, and there's also the added alignment. So I want a caster, but I also want a caster who's chaotic good or something, so I have to go recruit that person. And then I need to make sure they fit in with, a dex character, a thief or a rogue, something like that. I need my frontline attackers, I need my tanks, my fighters, and then maybe another, ranged attacker, or maybe another spellcaster. There's a lot of versatility in terms of who you can recruit in Baldur's Gate. In Dragon Age, there's really 3 classes. You have your fighter, your thief, and your mage. And you can customize each of those a little bit, but ultimately you're going to end up with one of each, and then that 4th slot is kind of your flex. You build that character however you want. It always ends up for me as one of each and then a specialist healer mage, which is unfortunate that it does kind of feel like you're handcuffed to that build. But I think when you expand the complexity of the directions you can go with a specific character, you almost need to expand the number of characters you can bring along with you so that you have the freedom to really dive into all of your customization options.
Yeah, I always thought that Dragon Age should have had a cleric class, because that would be Liliana. Perfect Liliana class. They made her a rogue. Okay. But she was, she was learning the ways of being a priestess and stuff,
Yeah.
If they had a cleric class, it might give you the option to say, okay, almost kind of like the, like Viconia, basically. You have melee ability.
You just want Viconia in Dragon Age.
Yeah, but you have the ability to tank them up. Animan is a great example of that. He's a fighter cleric. The best tank in the game.
Yeah.
Easily. I'll argue with anybody about that. I don't think I'm going to get many people who know Baldur's Gate too well to argue with me on that. But if you haven't tried it, Animan is a great tank. Better than any tank you'll ever run into. The other ones make them into DPS fighters, and they're great. So if you get a pure fighter, just you'll see the DPS is like the way to go. Massive damage. But Animan has this ability to shield. He can wear heavy armor, and once you get his cleric spells up, he does a lot of damage on his own just through that. So as a tank, he's just amazing. So that's why I said, something like that would be amazing to have in Dragon Age, but they didn't include a cleric class. It's just mage. I'm like, that would have made the difference. And yet Dragon Age is kind of considered much more beloved, but I think it's just because it's more modern. It's the only reason.
I think Dragon Age came about during a period where people were more enthusiastic about gaming in general, so it had that natural advantage where it was going to get a wider audience.
The main antagonist that you have in Baldur's Gate 2, massively interesting, because as far as you know, he's just a big bad. He's this guy who's making life miserable for you. But the more you find out about him, the more interesting it is. You can't really empathize with him because he's in a very different mindset, a different type of lineage from you. It's a different type of background, but it is very human at the same time. He has very rational reasons for doing what he did, at least to him. And he does make an argument for it. He's actually trying to help his people. And then by doing that, he overworks that and he causes more destruction than anything. And so he doesn't understand why people are so upset with what he's done when everything he did was for his people. But they didn't ask for that, and he just got carried away, and he still can't see forest for the trees.
Baldur's Gate 2 does that establishment of the villain character about as well as any other game. I think the other big example I can think of is Borderlands 2, where you're introduced to that villain pretty early in the game, and you immediately hate them. They are insufferable. Baldur's Gate 2 did that very well. I think Baldur's Gate 2 probably did it in a more kind of serious tone, which it worked a little bit more because you got that immediate introduction and you hate the guy. He's condescending. He treats you as if you are at best an inconvenience to him, and then goes on doing his own thing. And that's kind of what they do in Borderlands 2 as well. It's just that in Borderlands 2, the villain doesn't feel nearly as capable. In Baldur's Gate 2, the reason he thinks of you as nothing more than an inconvenience is because you pretty much are at the beginning of the game. You are not on his level. And you have to play through the entire game to get to that point. Whereas in Borderlands 2, it's just another guy with overinflated ego who thinks he's better than you. But it's that setup where you're introduced to them right away. They have done something to you, maybe not even personal. They don't particularly care about you individually. It's just you were a means to an end for them. And that is immediately going to set you up to just be like, I hate this guy. I'm going to take him down. I think Baldur's Gate 2 did a really, really good job of giving you just enough at the beginning to think like, okay, I don't know much about this guy, but I hate him. And if nothing else for the rest of this game, I am content to pursue a quest line that puts me back into a confrontation with him where I can take him down. And like that's really all you need at the beginning of the game. And then they do a ton of world building between that beginning and when you finally confront him again. And that's why Baldur's Gate 2 is excellent.
Yeah, and you think of like, this may not be the best example, but I'm going to go with it. Have somebody who has like inherited wealth versus somebody who worked hard to be wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
They're maybe the same tax bracket, but one is going to look down on the other a little bit. That's Irenicus. He sees you like you have all this for no reason. I have reasons to need what you have. He does. He actually does. His sister Bodhi, another great character. Man, I mean, how many times do you get like a side villain who is nothing more than just a side villain, Yeah. But you can actually even side with her to get where you need to go. And you don't even know that they're part of the whole bigger picture. You just know, hey, look, I'm giving an alternate thing from having to pay a lot of money.
Yeah, I think that was another part that was really well done in Baldur's Gate 2, is that you have a choice between the Thieves Guild and working with Bodhi, and you have reasons for each. And you're not given enough information to see the big picture with Bodhi, so you just kind of approach that decision as like, well, one of these is way more convenient, and I don't really like either of these people. So it makes that decision possible. It gives you enough reason to see both sides of it there, which is that's in an RPG, it's not really often that you see them provide you with decisions that actually matter and you can see both sides of it. It's usually that very heavy-handed, like, this is the right one, this is the easy one.
Yeah. And it's not only a choices matter situation. You see very different content choosing one or the other. And that's something you probably won't see in most games, if ever. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, I went with this one, so this was the consequence. We both got there. Whatever. I just made a morality choice is all I did. You actually miss out on a lot of content if you choose one side or the other. And potential loot, potential XP, and a bunch of other things like that. So you make your life easier at the end game by taking the higher road, maybe,
Yeah.
So,
and yeah, that was I think that's one of the things that Baldur's Gate did that elevated them above other RPGs in the era, is that your decisions matter not just in the moment. They play into things later on. And I'm thinking of games like Fable, where you have all those decisions to make. You have that kind of like morality decision in every little quest line. But it's every one of them feels compartmentalized. So like you make a moral decision in this quest, and then that's the closure for the quest. You make a moral decision in this area, and maybe it has a cosmetic effect on the environment. And that is like a permanent effect as you play through the game, but it doesn't really turn into much more than that. It's just you made a decision at the end of this quest line, and now you have this cosmetic change in the world, but not really a story one. Baldur's Gate provided you with a story impact for your decisions. You experienced the game differently based on the way you chose to play it. And that was really, really well done. That's what an RPG should be. That's what role-playing is. To feel like you had an impact on the story.
Yeah. And so things like that is why many of us were critical of Baldur's Gate 3 coming out. Like, do you really know the spirit of Baldur's Gate? Because there's a lot of things that they did that you don't see in modern games at all. And to their credit, you can't finish Baldur's Gate 3 in one playthrough.
Yeah.
You have to do multiple playthroughs to see all the various options that you have. You know, I keep my mouth shut on a lot of things when I see other people playing it. I do. I don't really, you know, I'm there, but a lot of times when I'm in people's channels, it's like, well, trust me, if you have a question, you give up. I am here, but I'm not here to give you any, I'm just here to see how you do it. But I can't tell you how many times people have like said out loud, I wonder if I could do this. I wonder if I can do that. Try it.
Yeah.
Try it.
Yeah, and I've definitely realized that that's something that's very important to me, is letting somebody kind of organically experience the game. It's not something that's easy for me because I always want to be like, oh, if you do this, you could find this thing. It's just cool stuff to experience, and I always have to like restrain myself from that. But Baldur's Gate 3 does a lot of that, where it's like, I wonder if this will have an impact. And then you just try it, and maybe it will, maybe it won't, maybe it's not where they devoted, you know, their attention. But there's that incentive to experiment. There's that maybe it will pay off, maybe it will have an unexpected consequence. There's a lot of that in Baldur's Gate games.
Yeah, because in Baldur's Gate 2, you know, if you're in a, say, a crypt or something, and there may be like an invisible stalker or something, you know that they're there. Nothing's preventing you from doing a fireball in there, you know? Maybe there are some innocents in there, maybe not, but experiment. So there is that whole similarity between the two that I really like. It's not so much a choices matter in that situation, it's just a matter of experiment, find out, see what you can do. You can always reload. That's what I love. The fact that there's a save. I'm not, you know, I've played Metroid games. I'm playing Wukong right now. I have nothing against the whole, what is it, bonfire save system. But I think it, for me, and this is just me, you lose a little bit of player agency when the run back is so long for a boss that makes, you know, you've cleared the area. You've done what you're supposed to do. You've leveled what you're maybe at a level that's maybe over leveled. Just put me near the boss.
Yeah.
But that's what I love about saved games. And they saw saves coming. Who cares? Play how you want. You know, the game works as intended if it has a save button.
Yeah.
But that's why I really liked about the whole, the experimentation, because in Baldur's Gate 2, of course, you can just save. I'm going to throw a fireball in there. I just want to see what happens. Maybe nothing. I'm not trying to get over on a scene. I just want to see what happens there. And you never know, sometimes.
I think, that's exactly why that stigma surrounding save scumming needs to go away. For a game like Baldur's Gate, that's the whole point, is you're supposed to experience everything. You're supposed to be encouraged to experiment. You're supposed to see, what happens if I make this decision that I would not ever consider in a straight playthrough. But because I have this option to save the game, make this decision, see its consequences, and then go back, I'm going to try it out. That's the whole point. We need to recognize that playing Baldur's Gate is getting maybe 30% of the game each playthrough. So if you want to save some time and get a different experience for a brief period, and then go back to the original playthrough that you were working on and make a different decision, the decision you would have made, you're doing it right. You're playing the game correctly. You should not at all feel pressured to play a game differently.
I'm just saying that the save scum thing is like, please, I don't want to hear it. That let people play the way they want to play.
Yeah.
No one's ever criticized me. I see it a lot. So it's like, oh, you save scum that, and let them play. Let them play. Because those games are kind of designed to, experiment.
Yeah. I mean, and you see it with the rolls in Baldur's Gate 3 too, where people will get shamed for, rolling a nat 1 and then just being like, all right, I'm going to reload the save so we get the different. I totally get that, because certain parts of your game shouldn't be tied to a random number generator. I get that you want to build your character so that they can face any challenge, but that the whole nature of D&D is that you can randomly fail even what you're excellent at doesn't translate to a video game as well. It works in the world of D&D. It doesn't so much in a video game.
Yeah. Most dungeon masters wouldn't give you a critical failure on something you are highly proficient at.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think as written, the rules say that there's no critical failure for ability checks. There's a critical failure for attacks and a critical hit for attacks. Outside of that, there's no guaranteed failure or success based on a roll. It's you let it play out. And yeah, a lot of DMs will just be like, you're good at this. I'm not even going to force you to roll.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing when like to open a lock is a 20 and I have a 1 to 4 for, extra bonus or whatever. And then my own personal ability, it gives me a +6. And then overall, you can kind of argue that I only really need to roll a 10 to get this. And I rolled a 5. I get that. But if I roll a 1 and all I needed was, say, a 10.
Yeah.
I would have gotten it anyway, because I would have gotten 11 with all my bonuses.
Yeah. That's the one that drives it home for me.
Yeah.
If all of your bonuses are higher than the DC check, don't bother rolling. There's no reason. And Baldur's Gate 3 D&D has a feature, a feat, I believe, called Reliable Talent. I think that's it. Basically, if you roll anything below a 10, it's treated as a 10. You can no longer roll a nat 1 on an ability check if you're proficient in that skill. So, and that's what it is. If you're proficient in that skill, you've built up the skills to not have it up to chance. You're always going to have a minimum level of success. And I feel like reliable talent should just be the default. That's what it means to be proficient in something.
Man, there's so many like little things too in Baldur's Gate 2 that so many scenes that are just absolutely memorable for me. But even like the Ethkatla market, like really the first area you're in, I just think I could see myself in that market, and the music is just so amazing for Baldur's Gate 2. It's definitely one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. It's unfortunate that each song is only like 2 minutes long. Because it's there, you're in the scene, and it just repeats it every 3 or 4 minutes. But it's the same song, which I like. But just make that song longer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those, especially like the Ethkatla city, the where you are when you start in Baldur's Gate 2, and the different districts there. Every single one of those feels interesting. So in Baldur's Gate 1, when you're going through, the 9 options of the city of Baldur's Gate, some of those you don't care about at all. There's like one reason to ever go there. In Ethkatla, every single one of those is a place I want to go back to again. There's something interesting about that place inherently, not tied to a quest. There's just something interesting going on there. And every single one of those districts has that. There's something that brings me back to it. There's something for me to be interested in that wasn't there in the city of Baldur's Gate in Baldur's Gate 1. So I think they did a really, really good job of like catching what feels like a pretty minor issue in Baldur's Gate 1 and completely eliminating it in Baldur's Gate 2.
They don't hit you over the head with lore either. You have to, when you find it, it's there, but they don't hit you over the head with it even when you find it and you're looking for it. So like I've made a video of the Temple of Joaquin. Like, who is Joaquin? I constantly see him in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. And now I saw him in Baldur's Gate 3. I'm like, who is Joaquin? Who is that? And they're not really that important. But because they are a goddess of merchants, they are important to those people. But they're just not an important goddess. But they are important to them. So that just blows my mind. And they were consistent with, that's why they didn't hit you over the head with the lore on it, because they're not a major god. But the people love them.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about that before. The idea that introducing lore as it becomes relevant to the player is kind of the proper way to get your characters interested in the lore. If you have a lore reason for the player character to care about something specific, and you introduce them into that lore as the player is playing through the game, it makes a lot of sense. But if you have world building information built into your game for things that don't matter to the main character, it should be up to the player to go discover those things, because most players aren't going to care. Overwhelmingly, they're just going to be like, it doesn't affect my character, doesn't impact gameplay, I'm going to leave it alone. There are plenty who will go the opposite route and say, like, somebody put the effort in to build up this world in a lot of different ways that don't matter to my character, but I want to explore them all. I want to learn about them. And that's the way to introduce your lore, is only share the stuff that is relevant to the player's character in mandatory sections. Everything else, make it optional.
Yeah, don't force the issue, because there's a area that you go outside of Athkatla, and it's inundated by these animals that are constantly attacking the town. They can't, they want your help to figure out what's going on here. We know the druids that are in the area, they normally are helpful, and suddenly we're not getting any help. There's a Temple of Joaquin. It's the only temple in that little city. But you're not, you would think like, oh, okay, let's go talk to our goddess. I mean, it's the goddess of merchant. The merchants are outside. They can't come in, maybe they'll help. The temple, the priest in the temple are like, what do you want us to do about it? It's Joaquin. She, know she can't help you.
She doesn't give a shit.
And I love that, because it's like, that would be a situation where a lot of games now we've been talking about Joaquin here. It's all over the place. Now let's make her relevant. We can't force it, because that's not the kind of goddess she is. She's an absent god, actually.
And that's the consistency with the lore, to say that, like, Joaquin wouldn't care. That's not her problem. Go find a god or a goddess and make that their domain. Yeah, that's the one you want to talk to. Joaquin, that's not who you should be bringing this up with.
I have, I think it's like a 10-minute video. So if you want a little bit more information about Joaquin, check out my site. A little self promo there. I made one for her. So I just thought she was I was like, who is this? I mean, I know of them, but I know Baldur's Gate has never explained it to me. And now they're in Baldur's Gate 3?
I think that was, I can't remember all of the books that were there when I first got into D&D. But like, you have, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook. There were so many like supplementary guides. And I think one of them didn't even cover everything. It was just like the pantheon of D&D, and it goes into the lore of each god and goddess. And then there were like, I think they even acknowledged it in that book. They were just like, yeah, there's a ton more. Like, we don't have time to document all of it. And I think they did a good job of capturing that in Baldur's Gate, to say that there's a lot going on that we can't even get into because of just time constraints.
And it is so central to the reason why we even have a Baldur's Gate 1.
Mm-hmm.
With the events that the gods play directly affect why we even exist. And yet it's not ever discussed.
Mm-hmm.
So some lore background. I mean, the god, I think you pronounce it Ao, he's the overlord god. He doesn't really care much. He doesn't really get involved, but he decided to basically make the gods mortal. And so they were on our planet, whatever, Faerun, and they had to struggle as a mortal. Well, some of them made it back to godhood in various different ways. Some of them didn't make it back. Some of them knew this prophecy, so they found workarounds. And I bring this up because Baldur's Gate 3, I think, can work with that story. Because already Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 have already done that, and to a lesser extent, Baldur's Gate 3. And if you've played the games and you know that lore, hopefully you kind of see where I'm tying a lot of this stuff together. But the Dead 3, who, you know, we have Ball, Merkel, and
Bane?
See, the problem is I always get Merkel mixed up with the original one. What was his name? His name was Jurgle. Jurgle, that's who it is, Jurgle.
Oh, really? That's who you... Okay. I was thinking the way that Withers addresses kind of the end game content.
Which is
it sounds like he's speaking to somebody.
The avatar of Jurgle is Withers, I believe.
Yeah, Withers very much feels like the chosen of Jurgle. If Gortash is the chosen of Bane and Ketherick is the chosen of Merkel.
It all fits if my theory's right.
Yeah, then it definitely fits that Withers is that representative of Jurgle. And I don't know if I see everything to suggest that Jurgle is pulling the strings.
He never died.
It's definitely plausible. I don't see anything that proves that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it's possible I'm just missing the stuff that points in that direction.
So I'll try to pick up where I left off. There are some things in mythology, like Greek mythology and stuff, that the mythos of D&D tries to take some similarities from. And Jurgle came before the Dead 3. Like you mentioned, Bane, Merkel, and Ball. Of all, I couldn't remember Ball.
Yeah.
But they basically, and it's right there at almost at the very beginning of the game. You can like read, if you read books there at all, they tell you about the Dead 3 and how they came to be. And whether they become irrelevant or not, you'll find out for yourself. But Baldur's Gate 3 took that to another level. And I know we're talking about Baldur's Gate 2, but I'm coming full circle here. But Ball is significant because of the events that Io had put into place. So the ancient Greek mythology, you had somebody like Hades, who is actually the oldest of the three major brothers, Neptune and Zeus. So you can imagine somebody who's in that society, who the eldest son takes over, and yet he is the lowest of them. They don't feel, they don't think of him like in a bad way, but he is the god of death, so they kind of avoid him. He's kind of a pariah of the group. And so you kind of see why the juxtaposition is so weird. Like, to us, he's just the god of the dead, but there's actually a little bit more to play there if you know the society and know a little bit more about that information. But Jurgle is in the same position. He's actually a very, very powerful god. He's almost equal to any of the highest gods out there. But yet he chooses, because he's bored. He doesn't want to do it anymore. Yeah. And these three fighters show up and they're like, we're going to take you out. He's like, you can have it. It's fine. And I think there's a lot of things going on that Baldur's Gate 2 is laying down the foundation for, that Baldur's Gate 3 picked up. I don't think they finished it. Now that's kind of also where I'm going with this too. I don't think they finished it, because I highly encourage, if you haven't played Baldur's Gate 3, just play it. Just play straight through. Don't let anybody tell you how to play it or whatever. Just play it. But at least at some point, play the Dark Urge. Larian was very specific when the game was coming out at full release, and they said, "Oh yeah, you want to play as Dark Urge? Trust me, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a very interesting playthrough." They kept mentioning it over and over, and I was like, why would they push that so hard just as a kind of a unique playthrough? I mean, Why would they just say, well, make sure you play as a druid? It's going to be really interesting because you even start off in a druid grove and all this other stuff. They didn't say anything about all that stuff. Every class, every background, they were like, yeah, you have these options, blah, blah, blah. Make sure you play as a Dark Urge. I still think there's something there related to the bigger story, related to 1, 2, the DLCs. And I think where Baldur's Gate 3 was going. They didn't actually finish it though, but there's so much that happens in Baldur's Gate 3 that are very similar to what we find out about some of the dead gods, because there's a puzzle involved in Baldur's Gate 2 where you're in one of the underground areas and the god is absent. The god is gone. They're just going through the motions. It's such a mood, that area. And anyway, all I'm saying is that I really see the ties between 1, 2, and 3, and how 2 is just that pivot point that's really significant. So you don't have to play 1 and 2 to play 3, but play Baldur's Gate 2.
Yeah, but you do. You should.
You're missing out. It is a generational game. It is so well done. Yeah, there are certain parts that I think could have been done better. When you go to the prison, where you have to go at some point to a prison, and you have a full party, you have to leave somebody on the outside of the door. I mean, it's kind of they're there forever. So if you play it enough times, you'll know, hey, look, I don't want to bring a full party here, or I have to bring at least this one character that I don't like. I'll bring him along because that's part of the story, and that's why you have to leave one character out, because that other character pops in.
Yeah. Yeah. There are definitely some of those little artifacts in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 where, you tell a party member to leave your party, and then they just stay rooted to the ground where you left them. And you're like, no, I'm going to burn this place down. You're going to want to leave. There's that, but there's also that there's a wonderful story, and that experience of not knowing when a decision is going to have consequences makes for a great playthrough for an RPG. But yeah, like we've said, if you have the time, a story mode playthrough of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 is worthwhile. Even now, it's a great story. If you don't want to master the combat, totally get that, because they're both challenging games. They both force you to learn the mechanics of the game and get good at them. So if you want to drop it down to that story mode just so you can get the story, do it. I fully support a story mode playthrough of both of them, because they do a lot of setup for Baldur's Gate 3, and there's even the stuff that doesn't feel as connected. It's worth listening to. It's worth experiencing at least once.
Yeah, there's several games that I could clearly say, hey, look, if you want to play it for a tactical reason, because a lot of people still play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 for a purely tactical reason. Like they make a extremely hard challenge doing it. They say, hey, look, the hard setting that's in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, that's not hard enough. We're going to make it harder. Everything's going to hit you 4 times as hard. I'm like, and we're going to do no death playthroughs. That's fine. Hey, that's the way you want to play, have fun with that game. But again, these people have probably played the Baldur's Gate even more than me and Banana combined. So
yeah, those challenge runs don't appeal to me at all. I fully support them if that's what you want to do, but that's not for me.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't, I just play how I'm a big advocate of play how you want, the way you want to. If you want to play with full mods, I think I sent you a funny little one on Baldur's Gate 3 where you were a Kurotoa character.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do remember that one. It was pretty good.
Had a love scene with Astarion. Hey, if that's the way you want to play, go for it. You're a fishy.
I feel like there are some rules that you would lay down that, like, play how you want, but if Viconia doesn't live through Baldur's Gate 1, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, my heart's with Viconia so much. Oh, yeah. Definitely one of my top 3 NPCs or companions, whatever, of all time. And her character definitely gets fleshed out in Baldur's Gate 2 quite a bit.
And then completely abandoned in Baldur's Gate 3.
I'm not.
That was a disappointment.
So much is there. So much is there. I could even argue that she's the canon romance in Baldur's Gate 2. Because you can romance her. And so if you think about like what you can become at the end of Baldur's Gate 2, again, I'm not going to spoil that, but what you can become fits in so well with her end story, because it does roll credits at the end of what happens to your characters afterwards. So no matter what you choose, whether you're with her, not with her, you romance her, not romance her, pieces fit. Well, Viconia, the pieces fit there as far as her future after the events of Baldur's Gate 2. And the romances in Baldur's Gate 2 are fairly limited. They're very heavy-handed toward a male player character. Mm-hmm. Way it is. I didn't write Baldur's Gate 2. I'm sorry, but yeah, the romances that you get are really interesting. The companions struggling against themselves, and you just kind of fall into romance. Yeah, which is very natural. Whereas Baldur's Gate 3, it's like, hey, there are runs of like how fast can you romance somebody into a sex scene. Yeah. So, yeah. But Baldur's Gate 2, you have to work for it. You have to work for those things, because even just giving the answers that you think that they want to hear won't get you there. Mm-hmm. You have to play the way you want to actually interact with that person to really uncover. And that is a sign of really excellent storytelling.
Yeah, and I think they went further into it in Baldur's Gate 2. So it's still oriented in that way where it's, male player characters prioritized, and you can start that romance accidentally, but there's a lot more calculated in Baldur's Gate 2 to say that like there's not just the correct answer and the wrong answer. There's a lot of different variation there.
Yeah, someone like Jaheira is a little bit more straightforward, even though there's a ton of dialogue. Mm-hmm. But like Viconia, whether you play as an evil character or a good character, you can actually organically get there with how you want to answer. And each pathway, her responses are pretty on par with what you would expect. And like I said, I think it's one of those choices matter type thing that if your goal was to romance her, you can get there. But the method of how you got there and her attitude towards you is very different in the two different ways of doing it. Mm-hmm. I was a little surprised by that, because the first time I played it through, I didn't romance her at all. But in later playthroughs, I started saying, well, let me just do it as a good character here. And that wasn't working until I started working the knife a little bit.
Yeah, I think there is, they definitely took into account that like these characters have their own personalities. So they're not just going to latch on to every version of the main character. You have to kind of be the person they want to be in a romance with in order for that romance to work out. And I mean, that's absolutely how it should be implemented. You can't just force everyone to like you.
Yeah. And like I said, I haven't romanced anyone at all in Baldur's Gate 3. I just none of them really appealed to me. And then like when they started doing extra stuff with Alfira, I was like, I like Alfira. That would be one. Like if I could put her in my party, she'd be there all the time. Haven't done it, but I would love to see that as a full, even if she don't ever say nothing, just
put her in the party. I had to put in the extra effort to keep her alive in my Dark Urge playthrough and managed to get away with it. But like the payoff isn't there. It's just that she's alive.
Yeah. She's very interesting because Alfira, and I know this isn't about Baldur's Gate 3, but she's very interesting because even if you kind of like do her stuff, which is very minor, you get to go to the Elf Song Tavern. And what's so significant about that is that she's not playing inside the Elf Song Tavern. She's playing on the roof. Lore consistent. Mm-hmm. It's like, because there's no music in the Elf Song Tavern besides the spirit of we think it's an elf or something. And so she's on the roof doing her thing. It's a little nod to the story, to the old story. And you wouldn't know that unless you played Baldur's Gate 1. But I was saying like with Jurgle, you have the Dead 3. Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 obviously don't go over Bane and, Merkel.
Yeah.
So that's why in 3 had to bring him back. And I thought that was somewhat significant because otherwise we're just talking about Ball.
Mm-hmm.
It's always just been about Ball.
Right.
Why are we talking about Merkel and Bane now? That's why I'm thinking we have to have a relevant reason to bring them back in order to kill them completely.
Yeah.
So that Jurgle can now take his position. Because there has to be a god of the dead.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense that they kind of introduced those 3 in Baldur's Gate 3. Maybe not even introduced is the right word, but they highlighted those 3 to set up a storyline that is related to them but doesn't focus on them.
Yeah, so Dark Urge with the background of a ball spawn makes all the sense in the world.
Yep.
So you can't be a ball spawn.
I feel like we've talked about that, and I feel like that is the canon Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough. I'm not necessarily the good, resist Dark Urge or the embrace it Dark Urge, just Dark Urge.
Just a Dark Urge, yeah. Yeah, because you have to have a reason to have that Dark Urge. And what is the connective tissue in all this? Ball.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like it's all there. And since it's always been about the hero of those stories as a ball spawn, it makes sense that if a DLC were to occur and you're facing Jurgle as the ball spawn, there we go.
I mean, yeah, it definitely... I feel like that gives more reason for Jurgle to even care. It's the idea that, like, you're the spawn of somebody who has already opposed him. And maybe that conflict didn't play out because Jurgle just stepped aside, but there's something there. There's that connection.
What about any characters that you absolutely dislike as far as companions go? I mean, for me, I want to say Nira, but she is pretty useful.
So I don't like wild magic at all, but I have terrible luck. That's my whole thing. It always backfires for me. I like the character of Nira. I like her storyline. I like all the stuff that you can do with her. I don't like her as a functional companion. I don't like a wild mage in my party. For me, Baldur's Gate 2, companions that I don't like having around, Jan Janssen just gets annoying. He's funny at first, and then it just goes on way too long. Outside of that, like, I think they're all pretty solid. I don't think there's too many people that I'm just genuinely against having in my party. I think Erdelis was disappointing in terms of his personality, but it also makes a lot of sense. He's a tiefling bard. He's supposed to be trying to seduce everything that moves. It fits contextually. It's another one of those things that, like, all right, I get it. Moving on. And then he had his whole unique weapons, and was it entropy, and I forget what the other short sword was, but like, he made for an interesting combatant as well, because he's a frontline bard. It's not really how you would think to play a bard. So he was engaging in a lot of ways, and then kind of annoying in that, just like, we get it. Stop trying to seduce everything. Yeah,
the storyline with Erdelis is infinitely interesting. And I was like, the first few times, I'll be honest, the first several times I played Baldur's Gate 2, I never considered putting him as a full-time companion. Mm-hmm. But then once I did, I realized, wait a minute, he's a little OP.
Yeah.
He is low-key overpowered. And they don't suggest that. You just discover that by playing the game.
Yep.
Where'd this come from? I could have had him this whole time and been like going on easy mode.
Well, it's also interesting because you get him, and if you immediately like recruit him and then go into his quest line, you get armor that is perfectly suited to him. And it's just like, right out the gate, you're like, yeah, here's this this character who has some unique abilities and has some cool weapons. Also, here's armor that makes them work in the context that makes them very viable in combat. So there's a lot of encouragement to play with Erdelis immediately upon recruiting him. It's just that kind of, I think it's the confidence, like the confidence bordering on arrogance. That is something that is always unappealing to me in every companion, and Erdelis definitely has that.
I see a trend here, Erdelis, Animan. You just don't like those type of characters.
I don't.
It. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, you like to see them struggle with themselves and then discover themselves through that. Yeah. I get it. I don't know. I don't know if there's any characters I just absolutely dislike. Nira, I like Nira until I do her quest. I don't like her quest, her side quest, her personal quest, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm doing all this for what? To have you in my party? Yeah. It's just, they said the payoff is that she's there, but she's always been wanting to be with you anyway. So why do I have to do something extra to work for? It's like they kind of missed out on the spirit of what made the companions work. So she's kind of throwing herself. So like Viconia, she says, wherever you go, I will go. I know you. And Nira knows you from Baldur's Gate 1. So why are we working so hard to keep her in our party? I get that she has troubles. I get that, but you should have made it so big as a side quest. But
I think, I agree with that. So I love the part of her side quest in Athkatla.
Yeah.
I love the part in that, like, the little hidden dungeon, the front that the Thayan wizards have. I love that part. The hidden refuge, that doesn't need to exist. I don't need to travel miles and miles away to set up this storyline. And I think overwhelmingly the idea behind her questline is that people are pursuing her relentlessly, and you need to deal with that in order for her to focus on what's going on with you. But her questline doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're just giving her closure so that she can move on, and she's not actually in any danger. You're going out of your way to encounter it. So it doesn't feel it makes sense with the way that it handles companion quests.
I mean, if they, after Athkatla, were to pop up every once in a while on the road as a, random enemy, that's good enough. That's more than enough.
Yeah, that would be fine. To say that you do that that brief sequence in, was it like the 7 Sins Inn or something like that, whatever it is, in the Promenade, and then after that, just having Nira in your party has this chance of triggering a random encounter with a Thayan wizard. That almost seems perfect for her character. That random chance of things not going your way is who Nira is. So to just make that the majority of her campaign, to say that, like, you can recruit her, and there's this operation that's nearby that feels relevant to her, so you go shut that down. And then it's just this kind of, you have her in your party, the side quest is deal with the shit that comes from having her in your party, not go find the hidden refuge, talk to those people, discover this conspiracy, shut it down. It's too much.
Yeah, you can definitely tell if you've never played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and only go straight into the Enhanced Edition, you'll probably be able to tell without anybody telling you who the added companions were.
Yep.
And that shouldn't be the case.
Yep.
Because they're forcing the issue, and granted, they were issues that worked, like that extra little side quest or whatever for Jaheira, for instance. That works. Because, yes, she'll be with you and she'll help you and do whatever, but she is also a Harper. And Harpers have their own responsibilities. And that even continues in Baldur's Gate 3 if you follow that quest line. There's a whole thing with that. So it's consistent with the character. And that's my point. You don't want to force a scene or an issue or an event or a different part of the map just because it worked for a different character that was beloved in another series.
Yeah. I think that's really, that's the identifying factor for all of those enhanced edition characters is their companion quests are injected into the game. They had to create new assets for them, so they don't feel like the other companions. You're not doing this one little minor thing here and there to keep them around or to keep them satisfied. You have to go out of your way for Rasad, for Dorn, for Nira, and they had to create a whole new area for you to do that. And then because they created a whole new area, you had to create a much larger quest line to justify the new locations that you came up with. And it grew out of control.
But I do like Nira a ton more than I like Dorn. Not because Dorn is not a useful character. He doesn't make sense. You look at the D&D side of things, he does not make sense. He doesn't fit. Why would you make this half-orc paladin, fallen paladin? So he can't do paladin stuff. He can't do orc stuff. I mean, why is he here?
Yeah, so that was... you got Dorn after, in the enhanced edition. So Baldur's Gate 1, you start creating your character. You're like, I want to be a paladin. You're like, all right, that means I have to be a human. That means I have to be lawful good. And if I fail to adhere to the lawful good part, I lose my paladin abilities. And then they introduced Dorn, who's a half orc evil paladin. You're like, none of that was available. Why can't, why do you get to do cool stuff that breaks the rules, but I can't? And that's not something you want your players asking in a game. Like, why is this outlier available for you to make, but I can't make my version of the character I want?
And they're just not the best at any of those things that I just mentioned.
Yep.
So yeah, like I said, I not that I don't like Dorn, he's not useful at all. Whereas Nira is infinitely useful for me. I mean, so.
Ultimately Dorn comes down to just being useful as a two-handed sword user with a unique sword. Like, that's it. After that, he's just another fighter. The paladin abilities don't really do too much. His story is interesting, but his combat is not.
One of my favorite characters in Baldur's Gate 2 is actually not a character necessarily, but it's the talking sword. Oh man.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, I will do that puzzle 1,000 times if I play Baldur's Gate 2 1,000 times. It's worth it. I love that talking sword.
Yeah, that's a good one.
What are we gonna go fight? Something? Come on, let's go get it.
It's funny because I think that was something else that Borderlands 2 did, and it was fun. They did a very different spin on it, and essentially the talking gun that you got is just more of an annoyance than anything. But it's another callback to say that, like, yeah, there's this enchanted weapon with a mind of its own, and it will speak to you and engage in conversations about certain events.
And think about it. If you were to create a game story with a talking sword, it probably is going to be, noble, or it's going to have this enlightened point of view. Oh, no, this guy is very surface level thinking. Let's go kill some.
Yep.
And, but I think also Cyberpunk did one. They have a talking gun in that one, and it's very memorable. I love that little talking gun. It's unfortunately... Well, this isn't a Cyberpunk thing, but I'm not going to give any spoilers for that. But I love how they integrated talking gun, and because it's a little bit more than just, okay, I have this gun and it talks to me. There's a story for that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes sense in the world of Cyberpunk. Like, to have a talking gun suits that world very much. I mean, you make a friend with a vending machine pretty early on in that game. Like, it fits. So I wholly support that. And it fits in Baldur's Gate too, to say that there are these enchanted weapons that have maybe the soul of somebody in there. Maybe the soul of somebody pretty average, nothing special. I haven't finished it. I do need to go back and play more.
That's another one where Com accidentally romanced somebody. He was all bitter about it. I can't believe they made me do that. Was that
Meredith?
Yeah. Meredith Stout.
I feel like Com's just not paying enough attention then.
Yeah.
Because that was one of those things where, like, I knew exactly what I was getting into.
Yeah, he's like, oh, here's my number, and here, meet me at the No-Tell Motel at blah blah blah.
Yeah, the No-Tell Motel. You couldn't piece it together, Com?
Yeah, we'll just a chat. Let's just have a chat, a business meeting.
I'm gonna go ahead and blame Com on that one. Like, I was with him on Liara because it feels like you could accidentally stumble into that relationship, but this one's all on Com.
Yeah,
You know what you're getting yourself into with Meredith.
I mean, Com's romances in game are, I think, very similar to his IRL. I mean, he just stumbles into romances all the time. He's just that suave. And so, but yeah, Baldur's Gate 2, go play the game for sure. It's
Definitely
worth playing. I've said it before, it's a generational game. I think it's one of those.
And if you find a way to play a character who is not Mage Thief, let me know, because that's every time. Every time it comes back to me making a character, I'm like, Mage Thief. Yeah.
No, I do Thief a lot, just pure Thief.
If they made Cleric Thief, if they allowed you to customize the menu bar, I would play Cleric Thief so much, but they don't. And navigating to your thief abilities is a pain in the ass, and you use them so frequently that it's a pain in the ass I'm not willing to deal with.
And I will say too that in Baldur's Gate 2, it does force you to have a fairly, doesn't have to be exact, like super balanced, but it does force you to have a balanced party. I've said it before, if you want to play Baldur's Gate 3 on easy mode, make everybody cleric, maybe one thief or bard, something to open up things. If
I feel like
a cleric,
having a thief is essential. Because even if you have, a monk who can detect traps, you can't disarm them. You need a thief for that, and that's a little inconvenient, but also it fits the game to say that, like, yeah, you should probably strategize a little bit.
Yeah. If you have the blades, in Baldur's Gate 3.
Was it Storm of Blades?
It's something. I mean, basically, you could just be a cleric. 5 clerics in a party, or a party of 4, right?
Yep.
Okay, so you have 3 clerics, all with blades, and you have your little thief in the middle. There are maybe a bard who could also do the same thing.
Yeah.
You just run through the goblin camp, and you're done. You're all done. That's what I'm saying, is that there is a way to go on easy mode, and you don't have to overthink that.
Were you talking? Was it Spiritual Guardians?
Light.
That spell, yeah. That's so. I do have like a new meta build for the cleric that I play, and it's basically you progress cleric enough to get that spell, and then you're good. You don't need anything else.
Yeah, you could either do that or the necrotic one. So depending on who you're facing. So if you're facing like undead, you don't want the necrotic one. You want the light. And if you're facing light-based things, you would do the necrotic one. So Yeah.
There's definitely those kind of like meta builds that pop up that people learn. But I think part of the appeal for Baldur's Gate 1, 2, and 3 was that if you're playing on, a normal difficulty, you can build your party however you want. There's definitely some things you'll need, but it's not so inconvenient to have, a thief in your party, to have a healer in your party. There's plenty of ways for you to enjoy customizing the character you want while still fulfilling those roles.
Yeah, and I guess what I was saying is that in Baldur's Gate 3, you could cheese out of it. But in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, you couldn't just make, 5 paladins or 5 clerics.
No, you just get a fighter mage thief with 18 in all stats. You're good to go.
Yeah. I've often wondered why you could reroll so many times. It would make for an infinite playthrough if it actually just said, get 5. Or be like Yahtzee, where you keep 1 stat. But you can only have like 6 rolls or something.
Yeah, it does feel like if you have infinite rerolls, you just get to set your stats. You just choose what they are.
Yeah, that is a fault of that side of it. Because it just a little. I could argue immersion breaking, but if you kind of know the character that you become, it kind of makes more sense. But you would kind of think that like you get whatever you get and you roll with that. But no. Now, if you played the game a few times, you're like, no, I'm not going out there with 10s of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember my first playthroughs of Baldur's Gate. Like, I didn't even have a single 18. And I was just like, yeah, that's how D&D works. Sometimes you get crappy rolls. And then I remember going back on subsequent playthroughs and I was like, nope, we're getting multiple 18s. I'm going to stick in this character creator until I get what I want.
And I really hated being like an 18 on charisma, but like 5 for wisdom. I mean, like, that just doesn't make sense. So I just, yeah. Anyway, well, I guess we'll kind of end it on that note. High charisma, low wisdom. We could probably do this. Hell, there's enough content within the Baldur's Gate series that this could be a full-time channel with just Baldur's Gate. But yeah, trust me, people try to make my channel to be that. I'm like, I don't want to paint myself in a corner, but I do get the appeal. I do get it, you know.
I don't want to paint myself into a corner, but that corner has a lot of stuff.
Yeah, for someone who started off as a Mass Effect channel, I'm like, how did I get here?
You're a BioWare guy.
BioWare, yeah. Irenicus, he is the name of the person that you meet right away. If you play Baldur's Gate 2, pay close attention to him, because he the more you play Baldur's Gate 2 over and over, the more interesting he becomes. You find he's like the Godfather, the movie. The more times you watch The Godfather, the more things you see, the more things you find, and he's that type of character. It's like, he did say that at the beginning, which comes full circle when I meet him later on. So he's telling me everything, but from his point of view, which I don't know where that's coming from, you find little things in his immediate area, the beginning dungeon, that just don't make sense with the type of character that you think he is. So again, it's one of those that's worth multiple playthroughs, in fact, just to pay attention to Irenicus as a character, as a portrait of evil.
If you're considering, storytelling or game development, and you want to learn how to build a villain, Baldur's Gate 2 is a master course in it. Give your characters just enough to dislike the character, to want to engage with them more, to want to confront them, and then give them pieces of their backstory over the course of the game that give you more insight into who they are and what their goals actually are. And maybe your character, or maybe your players, your audience, start to see things they actually relate to in your villain. That's how you make a great villain. A villain that feels like maybe just a couple of wrong decisions. I'm not too far away from that guy.
Yeah, they could be the main character in a different game.
Yeah.
And just things went bad. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it off with that. And we'll see you guys again next time, hopefully with Com. We'll see.
Hey.
And I tell you what, this will definitely be a good one to come back to if Com does finish Baldur's Gate 2. Then he could give us his insights.
He could tell us all of the things we were wrong about.
Yeah. Or we'll inevitably it'll be like, oh, do you remember when I never went there? But now let me tell you why I didn't go there.
Viconia was in Baldur's Gate 2?
The Druid Grove.
Yeah.
There's a Druid Grove. Anyway, well, we'll check you guys later. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.